Chevalier, de St Hélier. This ancient Jersey family, whose name was written Chevalier, Chevalier, or Chevalier, etc., or, abbreviated, CHLR, is probably indigenous. The Extente, 1271, mentions the forfeiture of Jourdain Chevalier of the parish of St Mary. It also shows that Matthew called Chevalier, a priest, owned land at St Martin, Extente of 1274, pages 20 and 21. In 1381, Robert Chevalier was one of the jurors for the extension of this date, for the parish of St Martin, Extente of 1831, page 1. In 1507 the name of Antoine Chevalier, of St Hélier, appears in the oldest rolls of the royal court, Catel, Book 1, and it is he who is the ancestor of the particular branch with which we are concerned in this notice. Let us be honest, it is not only in St Hélier that we find, in the 16th century, representatives of the Chevalier family. They were established in most of the parishes on the island, and especially in St Juan, Saint Pierre, St Jean, St Brelade, St Lawrence, etc. In 1543 we find in the rolls, Catel, Book 9, the name of John Chevalier alias Knight, of St Lawrence, who perhaps belonged to a Chevalier family, several members of which were at that time settled in Southampton. When Jerseymen went to live in England, they often translated their patronymic names into English. Thus de Saint Croix became Holy Cross, Blampied was metamorphosed into Whitefoot, La Cloche was transformed into Belle, Civray into Savory, etc. There is on the King's Fief, at La Moye, St Brelade, a piece of land called the Fief Chevalier, Register, Book 6, folios 341 and 346, 1624. In the 15th and 16th centuries several representatives of this family were ecclesiastics. For example, Sire Roland, or Ralph, Chevalier, of the parish of St Hélier, priest in 1498, Sire Richard Knight, also of St Hélier, deacon in March 1517-18, see Bulletin of 1890, page 416 to 418, Sire Jacques Chevalier, rector of Grouville, 1548 to 1565. Master Olivier Chevalier, regent of St Anastas around 1525, and until about 1558, had probably studied at a university. It seems certain, according to the Inquisition of 1538, that he was at that date filling the office of Attorney General of Jersey. He had married, his second marriage, we believe, Philippine, daughter of Thomas Botterill and Guillemine Hugh, and aunt of Clement Botterill, Lord of the Fief S. Paines, who was Constable of St Juan, 1601 to 1609. The widow of Mr. Olivier Chevalier and her son Helier Chevalier had to support a long lawsuit against Mr. Jean Paulet, Dean, concerning the possession of a house called the House of Gaues, where Mr. Olivier C. was holding the glue. See Catel, Book 9, the Saturday after October 14, 1560, the October 24th and the Wednesday after December 10, 1560. These acts are printed in the 25th Bulletin, pages 300 and 301. We have every reason to believe that Mr. Olivier Chevalier belonged to one of the branches of Saint Pierre. But we do not intend, in this notice, to give a history of this particular family. Our aim is to deal especially with the branch of St Hélier which gave the country Jean Chevalier, the chronicler. Jean Chevalier was born, as we shall see later, around 1589. He was the son of Clement Chevalier and Jean Malzard. In 1624 we find him mentioned in the rolls as officer of the Constable of St Hélier, with another Jean Chevalier who was the son of Guillaume. A few years later, on the 28th of September 1638, he was sworn in as Vingtenier of the Vingtaine of the city. Let us note that Clement Chevalier, elder brother of the chronicler, had preceded him in the functions of Vingtenier of the Vingtaine of the city. Jean Chevalier exercised them during difficult times. The political dissensions which divided England had their repercussions in Jersey, and the island was torn apart by the struggles between royalists and parliamentarians. Chevalier remained faithful to the royalist cause, for which he doubtless had to suffer a lot. He himself recounts in his journal how he refused, in 1643, to the parliamentary leaders, the keys to the arsenal of St Hélier, despite the death threats to which he was subjected by Philippe le Boutillier. At the end of 1651, when the Republicans seized the island, Jean Chevalier had to resign the position of vingtenier. In 1665 he was sworn in as one of the officers of St Hélier for the extente of 1668. He also became, and remained until his death, deacon of the parish of St Hélier. It is very regrettable that due to the insufficiency of contemporary documents, the life of the chronicler is so little known. Only two historians give some details about him: Reverend Edouard Durel in the notes he added to the History of Jersey, by Philippe Fall, and Mr. Hoskins in his book entitled Charles II in the Channel Islands. We have little to add to what these historians say relative to the Chevalier manuscript and its author. Let us be allowed, however, to give here some impressions that the reading of the work has suggested to us. Jean Chevalier was certainly a serious, religious, intelligent and methodical mind. He had doubtless received an education uncommon at that time, and, being keenly interested in politics and the prosperity of his country, he had set himself the task of carefully noting, day by day, the principal events of the struggle between the royalists and the parliamentarians. This undertaking was not the easiest. It was a question of both relating what was happening on land and at sea, in Jersey and Guernsey, and even in England, of giving an exact and impartial account of the cruises made by the frigates of the King, armed by Lord George de Carteret, to speak of the supplies of Chateau Cornet, besieged by the parliamentarians of Guernsey, etc. Such seems to have been the programme of our chronicler, and one can only admire with what conscience, what precision, what accuracy of detail he acquitted himself of his voluntary task. Evidently his position as vingtenier put him in a position to be informed quickly and surely on what was happening in the island in general and especially in St Hélier. The town, though very small at that time, was nevertheless in some way the centre of the public life of the country. Furthermore, by his marriage with Marie Lecloche, daughter of Edouard Lecloche, of St Hélier, he was allied to several of the best families of the island. The Reverend Etienne Lecloche, rector of St Juan, was his brother-in-law, and Benjamin Lecloche, lord of Longueville, jure justiciar, his first cousin, had married one of the sisters of Messire Philippe de Carteret, knight, lord of St Juan, bailiff and limit governor. Jean Chevalier was therefore highly connected in a social as well as political point of view. It is therefore impossible for us to share the opinion of Hoskins, who calls him, in a passage of his book, Charles II in the Channel Islands, a subaltern parochial officer, whose most authoritative source of information could have been little more than second-hand backstairs gossip. This gratuitous malignity did not prevent Hoskins from drawing extensively on the Chevalier manuscript. He recognizes, moreover, from the preface of his work, that the Jersey chronicler is entirely trustworthy. We have already said that the aim of our author, in writing his journal, was above all political. It is true that, from time to time, he approaches other questions, but he does so very soberly and, so to speak, with some repugnance. Gossip and tales are not to his taste. It is even much to be regretted that he has so rarely deviated from his political program, because we would have liked him to speak to us about himself, his family, his profession, etc. It is in vain that one would seek information on this subject in the work of Jean Chevalier himself. Also, we would have had the greatest difficulty in identifying it through its many contemporary homonyms, since the following notes, evidently written by one of the chronicler's sons, are included in the manuscript. November 1675. My mother Marie Lecloche, wife of my father Jean Chevalier, died aged 83 years. On November 30, 1675, Jean Chevalier died aged 86 years. This data is fully confirmed by the burial registers of the parish of St Hélier, of which here are two extracts. Marie de la Cloche, wife of Jean Helier Deacon, was buried on the 23rd of November 1675. Jean Chevalier Deacon, aged 80 and 6 years, died on the last day of the month of November and was buried on the first day of the month of December 1675. We see therefore that the chronicler reached the advanced age of 86 years and that he survived his wife by only 8 days. We can also conclude that he was born around 1589, but it is impossible to fix the exact date of his birth, because the registers of St Hélier do not begin until 1596. Let us also note that, shortly before his death, the chronicler presented for baptism, on September 6, 1674, his great-grandson, Clement Chevalier, who became Constable of St Hélier in 1717. After these few details on the author of the manuscript, let us return to his work and recall that it includes the period of 1643 to 1651, and ends with the arrival of the parliamentarians in October 1651. Chevalier appears to have intended to continue his journal for a few years. This is evident from several passages in the manuscript, and especially from an allusion to a new volume in which he intended to speak of a crown that Messire George de Carteret, bailiff and Lord Governor, had placed on the bell tower of St Hélier. It even seems probable that he had taken the notes with the aim of writing another volume. But, for some unknown reason, he was doubtless unable to carry out his project, and his notes were lost. In 1645, when he was about 56 years old, he speaks, in passing, of the weakness of his eyesight. "My eyes are faded." This is perhaps the reason why he would not have continued his interesting narrative beyond 1651. What a pity he did not! There are so few sources of information in Jersey for the period between 1652 and 1655. The rolls of the royal court and the estates are almost all missing for these few years when the parliamentarians came back to power and doubtless introduced many changes which it would be interesting to know. Chevalier would not have failed to inform us about this little-known period of our history. He would have carefully related the main facts, without counting the ordinary or extraordinary incidents which would have been found, in the course of his journal, according to an expression which is familiar to him. But, while expressing regrets, let us be grateful that we have, in the work of Jean Chevalier, an infinitely precious contribution to the history of our country during the civil wars of the 17th century. According to tradition, the house of our author was situated on the marketplace, near the place where the offices of the Chronique de Jersey are today. This is confirmed by an act, the States of March 22, 1697-98, allowing Mr. Clement Chevalier, descendant of the chronicler, to rebuild his house, situated at the top of the market, in order to make it more convenient. There were pillars in the old house, and in their place he laid the foundations of the new one. Furthermore, the act tells us that, as a prison had just been built in the city, the cage was removed. The latter, we are told, was in the way of the view of the house of the said knight. The States decided to erect in place of the cage a pedestal, with 5 or 6 steps, on which a dial would be placed. States, Book 3, date cited. The new residence of the knights bore the initials C.C. Clement Chevalier, and the date, we believe, of 1715, still legible a few years ago. These indications disappeared during some repairs undergone by the building. The property in question was inherited by the Helier family. We have reason to believe that Clement Chevalier, the eldest son of the chronicler, was one of the principal merchants of St Hélier. It appeared interesting to us to note that in 1,687 million rupees. William Button, Boughton, née Jean Bailhache, was condemned to pay Mr. Clement Chevalier, son Jean, the sum of 100 livres tournois, for wedding clothes provided by him, X69, the 17th of December 1687. According to the registers of the parish of St. Lawrence, Mr. William Button and Mrs. Jean Bailhache were married in the island of Sark, in 1684, by Mr. Benoist, minister of the said place. Monsieur Clement Chevalier, grandson of the one we have just spoken of, exercised for some years the functions of centurion of St Hélier, and, on the 11th of May 1717, he was sworn in as constable of this parish, replacing Monsieur Philippe Patriarchy, ex-85. But he was not to occupy this important office for long, for an untimely death took him away 2 years later. He was buried at St Hélier on the 2nd of May 1719. His eldest son, Clement Benjamin Chevalier, became Lord of the Fief of Anville, in 1737–38, on the death of his mother, née Marie du Maresque. He did not reside long in Jersey, for a large inheritance which he made in December 1722 led him to settle in England. His cousin Temple Chevalier of Aspel Hall, in the county of Suffolk, who died on the 5th of December 1722, had bequeathed this property to him by will, dated the 10th of November 1722. Temple Chevalier had sold much of his property in Jersey, as early as 1702, doubtless to purchase Aspel Hall from the Brooke family, of which Lord Cobham was one of the members. Clement Benjamin Chevalier, designated in the royal court rolls as Clement Chevalier, gentleman, therefore settled at Aspel, where his family has continued to this day. Among his descendants, perhaps the best known, were John Chevalier, M.D., who died in 1846, who first cultivated and introduced into practical agriculture the famous barley called Chevalier barley, and Temple Chevalier, died in 1873, Canon of Durham and Professor of Mathematics at Durham University. The present representative of the family at Aspel is John Barrington Chevalier Esquire. Lord Kitchener of Khartoum and Aspel belongs to the Chevalier family of Suffolk through his mother, née Frances Chevalier, daughter of the Reverend John Chevalier M.D., and aunt of J.B. Chevalier Esquire. The coat of arms borne by the Chevaliers of Aspel Hall is described as follows: argent, on a cross, gules, 5 escallops of the field. The General Armoury, Burke, and the Armorial of Jersey, page 331, give another description of the arms of the Chevalier: azure, a unicorn's head, a raised, argent, on a chief of the last, 3 sinister wings, sable. See finally, in a volume offered to the Public Library of Jersey, by J.B. Payne Payne Esquire, son of the late J.B. Payne Esquire, author of the Armorial, an engraving representing the arms of the late Jean Daniel Chevalier Esquire, similar to those found in Burke and in the Armorial.